you know, that always gets me off guard. Welcome again, and I'm excited to be here with you all and really dive into this topic around optimizing blended learning and maximizing time to accelerate the learning. As Amanda shared, my name is Jen Bernier. I am part of the Learning Innovation Catalyst team. I am a transformational coach, so I support teachers and educators, but really excited to dive in with you all. If you're on Twitter and would like to connect beyond this session, or need support, or just want a thought partner in the work, feel free to reach out via Twitter. Those handles are there. And you can also connect with us in BL in Action, which is our Twitter chat online to support you all. Without any more of that, our goal for today is really to dive into, and I'm really going to provide more of a guide in this session to support how you will optimize how you can optimize blended learning and maximize your time using the blended learning models simultaneously and effectively to synergize and accelerate the learning experience for your students. And feel free, I'm also looking at the chat over here. So if you would like to share your role in the chat, I invite that if you would like to. If make a connection to what you might be looking for with this in your role as we move forward. So with that being said, always want to just start with a quick reflection of where you are. Thank you, Nikki, and welcome. Where you are in this work around blended learning. And so to get us a little connected, I wanted to make the connection relevant to the session. And so I want to just ask this question here. What words or phrases come to your mind when you hear blended learning? And so I'll pause here to give you all an opportunity to share in the chat. Feel free. I think feel free if you feel empowered to come off of mute. I don't mind, but would love for you to share in this moment of reflection. So I'll take a minute here. And if you're like, I have no idea, that's okay as well. Different subjects, collaboration. Thank you, Nikki. Anything else? What comes up when you all hear this? Welcome, Sasha. Teacher assisted, not led, hybrid learning models using technology and in person to deliver content. Thank you, Vanessa. Ways to maximize learning. Absolutely. That's why we're here, right? Facilitator of learning. Thank you, Tony. It's also great to see, be able to connect and kind of just know names of who's in this session. So keep those coming. And that's exactly, those are pieces, right? This is, the term blended learning, has many different definitions, different interpretations. And, we really want to start with just grounding us in thinking about what is blended learning, right? And so keeping students interested, yes, absolutely. So let's build that collaborative community over there in the chat as we continue on, because all of those ideas, as we're thinking about optimizing blended learning and maximizing time, these are the things we want to consider. These are the passion that drives blended learning, right? Like it's unique. You're a facilitator of the learning. It's keeping students engaged and connected beyond the four walls of the classroom. And so to ground us here, just to connect us a little further, thank you all for sharing in the chat. Blended learning involves leveraging technology to afford, I saw technology come up in the chat, leveraging technology to afford each student a more personalized learning experience, meaning there's increased student control over the time, place, path, and or pace of their learning. With that being said, thinking about the models, which we're going to talk about here, and I'm going to share a really powerful, helpful, and I think powerful driver resource with you all. So just know you will be leaving with something to support you in this work. But thinking about the models and how to, use them to create a student-centered learning environment, right? That's the goal. so that personalization is present, right? Students have agency, voice, and connection between the student and teacher. Uh, all of this so that we're keeping equity front of mind, right? Ensuring that the lessons are relevant to students, they feel empowered. And so blended learning practices and all of what is shared in the chat of how we're going to engage and connect and keep students motivated and leverage technology, differentiate the learning, these all create a pathway and a foundation um, for personalization and equity. And so we can leverage the models and really maximize our time and how we're connecting further with students. What blended learning does is actually moves the teacher, saw someone say facilitator, moves the teacher from the front of the classroom and frees them up. In every single model, there's a teacher station or teacher time. It frees up the teacher to now be able to differentiate for each student, right? So with that being said, thinking about what are we teaching, right? And we can all we know there's certain things that students must leave within every lesson, right? And so starting to think about where you are in your own classroom and your lesson, right? There's certain things that students need to leave with, right? So there's the content. Every class, every level, you can think about your own learning experience growing up. The teacher is teaching content. There's content that students need to know. It's an essential aspect of the educational process, right? It's not something we take away, right? They have to leave with content knowledge. However, it's not the only part, right? There's those skills. And so the content specific skills, right? And there's also general skills. So thinking about content specific, those, for an example here, what are the past and present connections in history, right? So like, what do students need to know maybe from grade 4 to now grade 5? Are there relevant skills that they need to have engaged with in practice, right? That we may consider an activity around in order to ensure that we're pushing the work forward and accelerating the learning. And then there's those general skills, those lifelong skills, those things that they can continue to take, right? Close reading, being able to collaborate with their peers, being able to manage their time, right? Bringing in some of that social emotional learning piece. So right now, when we think about the current pacing of education, right? I'm going to move through these a little quickly here, but it's a linear fashion oftentimes, right? Without the models, we sometimes see this very linear fashion where we teach the unit, we teach the lesson, students are learning at the same path, right? This normally meets, it's somewhat of a zero-sum game here, right? So teachers make trade-offs every day. I'm a former educator, we keep these things front of mind, right? There's focus on maybe either content or skill at a lesson, right? One day we're going to do content, we're going to do some practice the next day. Aiming for the many, right? So this does meet the needs of possibly the majority of the class, but really thinking about what we're going to go into today is like how to actually ensure each need is met by leveraging blended learning. And so this linear fashion or the traditional way of learning, the traditional classroom, limits productivity, right? There's smaller amounts of class time, of time in class. Educational process lacks structure outside of the class. Right? So once students leave, maybe making that application to the real world, there's those gaps in there. And then you might hear, but I use the blended learning models, right? Like you could use the models still. However, thinking about these questions. So this is being recorded, but feel free to screenshot or note take or any of these things, but you also have them as a resource. Thinking about how do the models complement each other? Right? So how do I use station rotation and bring in a playlist, right? Rather than seeing them as in isolation. We'll talk a little about that in the optimizing process. How is data from the models used to further future instruction? So how am I taking that formative data and applying it for the next step, applying it to what students need? And do the models eliminate this zero-sum game? So do the models eliminate, one lesson being just content, right? Just being skill practice, right? Does it eliminate those that we discussed earlier? So We know models are often used in isolation. You may be familiar, and feel free to share this, but you may be familiar with like one type or a type of model that you're really used to using, which is great. And I would actually recommend building on that. But planning still focused on either content or skill, right? It's like either or. Better secondary opportunity. Maybe it's like, okay, I'm going to use playlists today to engage students a little more, rather than it being the norm to use these. Use for individual purposes, but don't necessarily build, right? So, you may use flipped learning to deliver the content via, video form to students, but ensuring that it builds onto the next piece of that content and knowledge. Models become formulaic, stations serve the same purpose every time, structures of playlists remain the same. Flipped classroom is just about content, right? And so this is the foundation, right? This is what blended learning models do. However, we can really start to, what is everything that it can really do? What can we pull out of our students, and allow them to really drive the work forward and free up your time so that it's used in a way that is purposeful for students. And so just to recap here, these are the 4 common type of blended learning models. I'll share this really great resource. It's going to be linked as well, but I'll also I'll drop it in the chat here if anyone would like to, bookmark it. But that's a blog by Dr. Catlin Tucker, just about overall using blended learning models with more flexibility, right? So going beyond even the traditional way of how we thought about blended learning to really think more deeply and creatively of how we can use those in the classroom. So commonly we saw, station rotation, teacher-led station, there's an offline station, there's an online station, right? However, let's shift our mind for a moment and think about how might I consider using a station rotation a little more flexibly so that the teacher station goes beyond the teaching of the content, right? That teacher station may here now be opportunities for checking in with students based on what was previously covered. It might be an opportunity to provide feedback for students individually or on in groups. It might be a pullout time where while students are working on their offline and offline activities, you can actually use this as maybe a SEL check-in moment at that station. And I'll also name here that in the typical structure of station rotation, students are moving from station 1 to possibly station 2 to station 3, and it kind of just rotates like that, right? Normally it's timed. Using it a little more flexibly, considering here actually providing students choice stations, right? So they may select a starting place, or you could recommend a starting place, and then they get to choose the next station they go to based on where they are or where they might have self-assessed themselves, which we'll talk a little about in a moment. And so 2 of the main things I want to highlight from this slide here are considering what online activities would students do and what offline activities would students do for each of these areas. So curating pretty much your activities and just having those saves with time in the planning process, but thinking through the online may go beyond curriculum, personalized practice. You might actually leverage a playlist that you created at one of the stations. So now when I'm at station 2, I can engage in working through at my own pace as a student, having all my resources in one place. And I'm actually working through a playlist activity within a station rotation model. And so, this is what a playlist could look like, right? And so you would actually take this and put into a station rotation. So it still has that, those elements of, possibly something for students to watch, right? So that flipped video that you created now becomes a part of the learning process within the playlist. There may be an opportunity for students to analyze, looking at looking at real world writing, right? So now they're analyzing something that goes beyond the classroom. And so just for reference, this was an example of a playlist on writing argumentative essays. And so, really curating for, once again, what are those activities? There's a healthy balance that you would want to include in this playlist. And so just as a reminder, the playlist is the guide. So if students are working through a playlist at a station rotation, it's freeing up your time to now be able to provide one-to-one with students, but also it fosters independence, right? It allows for choice and differentiation based on needs as students are working through that. And, really think of it as their roadmap. You'll also see flipped learning when you dive into, thinking about optimizing this. And so going beyond, this is kind of how we viewed flipped learning here, where there's an offline activity, it normally drives inquiry, peak of interest, assesses prior knowledge. There's an online activity, maybe the teacher leveraged, Edpuzzle or something like that. And then there's an offline where now they're in class and FaceTime doing the practice piece, right? But this is also still in silos. And so thinking about optimizing it, how else might maybe it's not only content that students are watching, maybe it's modeling, there's problem solving that they may see in that video. So they're actually able to go a little beyond the content knowledge of watching it and then practice when you get to class, right? Or practice in the class. And so let's talk a little here about how to take these pieces now, and I'll provide steps, and I promise you all, and if there's any questions as I'm going, I'm also still looking at the chat and things like that. But as I said, all of this is going to be wrapped up in a resource, and I'll provide some guidance around that of actually putting this in action and saving some time on your end. So optimizing blended learning, let's break it down. We spoke about that content. So analyzing your upcoming lesson, for example, or your upcoming unit, however you might consider, where you are of what how you would want to optimize the models, and breaking it down into the content, right? So what's the rote knowledge or the recall information that students need from there? What are the needed skills to be shown throughout the learning process that you want them to take away, right? Then also thinking about the skills, right? So we have those two components, the content specific we spoke about, and the general skills that students need to practice with, engage with, hear from other perspectives and other students. The skills needed to accomplish the objective that you're aligning this all with of the class, and to engage with the content, right? Make learning fun. Someone named it in the chat. I think it was Bunim. Yeah, keep students interested, engaged, right? So it should move them, right, throughout the process. And underlining skills needed to accomplish. So what do they need to be able to do in order to get the most out of that lesson and that activity? So starting to optimize. Here we go. So every assignment has a purpose. There's that primary purpose, and it should be matched to the blended learning model, right? So, and I'll go a little deeper into that. There's a secondary goal, right? And it should be identified. So my primary purpose, what's that takeaway that you want students to leave with? And then also thinking about the early finishers, possibly like those, that we see finish a little earlier, something that they can actually engage with beyond, right? So they're not just bored or becoming disinterested in the work. And then there's also identifying the next goal. So in the planning and the use of the blended learning models, like really thinking, okay, know the steps that are needed, know the next steps, right? So after I'm done with this lesson and using this blended learning model, what is actually the next step directly tied to this? How am I building on with the use of the models? And so gathering data to identify those next steps as they're engaging in the process, really thinking through, the teacher time that students are working with you. It really depends on where they are in the learning, right? You may discover from the formative assessments that are taken throughout the process, you may discover different pathways that are needed. And so you'll want to begin to utilize the models alongside each other, right? So utilizing, for example, and here are some ways to do that, utilizing unit long playlists, right? So building out a playlist for your unit. What are all the activities you might include in there, the ways you're going to take assessment, and utilizing those as a main focus on skill practice, right? So that playlist that they're working through is for practicing and engaging with the skill, the hands-on piece, you might have heard it as. Utilizing flipped classroom for pre-teaching, right? So there's a mix of content and modeling, right? Not just delivery of content, but they're actually able to you know, have access to the information, to the content. There's some modeling that's going on in that video. And I love the flip learning and maximizing it, really thinking about being able to use these in other ways, right? Like midway through the unit, you may actually realize that a group of students or a student might have a gap, right? And you can actually leverage the use of that video that was maybe from the beginning of the unit and actually plug it into a playlist as now a choice if you need to watch it, because some students may not need to, right? But it's always available to them if they need to. So utilizing station rotation for content and collaboration. So while they're in that station rotation, thinking through, okay, I'm going to use station rotation today because the goal and the purpose is to get students collaborating and engaging with the content, leveraging individual and collaborative stations in new ways, right? So rather than it just being an online station, maybe that's actually an opportunity for students to engage in a Padlet and have a conversation with each other and a discussion. And that ties into optimizing projects, right? So, really thinking about, and Dr. Catlin Tucker talks about this in that blog that I shared around the design and universally designing your lessons. And so utilize all three of the models, sounds like a lot, during projects, right? Creating projects around the content and the skills that students are to walk away with. And so flip classroom for availability, right? Students always have modeling and scaffolding at their hands. They always have it when they need it. And so leverage that as they're working through the projects. What are those videos that might be helpful? What are the ways that you can model, or maybe work as a grade team here to kind of curate these to have them. Playlists. Optimizing it for projects, students move through the projects when and where they want, right? And so this allows for them to have the resources, the tools, access to maybe recommendations or examples, all in one place. So now as they're working through that playlist, they don't have to wait for teacher time. They don't have to wait to ask a question about the project. They actually have access. Maybe they can schedule their teacher time with you. And then the station rotation for collaboration. So this is, you might make stations based on project progress. So as students are working on the progress or on the project, identifying ways to group students in more dynamic ways. You might have identified students are in certain areas of the project and now forming them in a group so that they can discuss. Students can discuss with their peers who are in the same place as them within the project, or possibly learn from another group, kind of like bringing in the jigsaw method, right? So learning from another group where they can discuss and learn and hear from others that are working on that same project. So it goes really beyond the skills. Optimizing assessments. So as you're thinking about using these models, consider how can I optimize the assessments? In the traditional way, formative assessment, you might see like exit tickets, right? At the end of the lesson, student has an exit ticket, or maybe there's like Google Forms, right? Where they ask their questions, a personal log. But we can go a little deeper, right? So we can bring in skill mastery into this optimizing of assessments, right? So activities that are creating a single point rubric for students to use. And we have a lot of, these resources, they are hyperlinked in what I'll share, but maybe you have yours already, right? So the single point rubric is an opportunity for students to self-assess themselves by using I like to think of it as a more student friendly way of interpreting the standards and assessing at themselves. And this is a really great tool to then use in conferencing or one to one with that teacher time, because you have that data and students also have thought about where they are in the learning process. Traditional rubrics, they still work, right? So you might also still be able to bring in some of those traditional rubrics to use with students. And then informal assessment, right? So optimizing assessments, bringing in the one-to-one conferencing, right? The small group at the teacher station, actually using all of these as opportunities and activities, I like to think of it as you're building out the lessons and just selecting the models you use. I share all this saying, I know we're coming up on time here, but none of this matters if it's not sustainable. And so thinking about optimizing it, right? There's a lot of planning, there's a lot of ways and flexibility that I mentioned, but optimizing teacher time, right? So tools should be incorporated. And when we're thinking about blended learning, we're leveraging the technology and tools. And so it should be incorporated to make the process feasible. So an example here, Flipgrid, for example, allows students to connect with their peers, but even experts beyond, right? Edpuzzle lets you flip the instruction and gain formative, take formative assessment as students engage with the video. Peer Deck, for example, or Nearpod, these let students pace themselves so that they are able to navigate the slides and go back and, receive learning that maybe they missed, right? And so all of these above, by leveraging these technology tools now within the models, they all provide formative feedback in a very concise way. They give you like little data reports, or you can capture it and see how you might group students based on how they responded, and now select the model in that way. So as we get ready to wrap up here, turning over the keys is also a really big piece of this optimizing blended learning as a whole. In all of these situations, you notice the teacher was not the driver, but really took on a different hat, right? Students became the driver. They are the drivers. And so there's a big warning ahead. There's risk, there's a lot of risk taking, but oftentimes that leads to creativity, that leads to honestly things that could not have been planned for. And so changing the role as you're optimizing, thinking about yourself not as a lecturer, right? And rather, and these are just some ways, the teacher's role now becomes a facilitator, an interventionist, the cheerleader, right? Cheering students on as they're working in that station where they're self-pacing themselves, right? You're providing some encouragement around the way, some check-ins around the way. They know they have access to you at also, right? Learner, the coach, the mentor, the guide, the data specialist. You may be thinking at, Coach Jen, you could update your resume after engaging with these models in this way, because now your role is no longer the one who is doing the most talking or doing the most of the engagement here. So overall, this process really, students can currently work on content and skills, not in isolation. There's support available in class and out of class, right? Because now they have those videos, they have you modeling the content. They don't necessarily, they're not reliant on teacher for help. We want to move from that mindset. And then more opportunities for students to learn in their own way, right? There's more creativity, there's more in the learning process. There's an increased agency that students have to take. And a lot of this takes building up this muscle. It is a shift. And so it takes work, it takes collaboration, it takes connecting with other teachers and, growing together. Teachers support students when they encounter the issues, right? So focuses shift from whole group to one-to-one support where students are. So as we close, and I want to just leave space if anyone has any thoughts or comments or anything, but I'm going to share with you here, as you get started with this work here, This is a tool that you can use, and a lot, and there it's included with a ton of examples, and also just ways where you don't have to recreate the playlist. You don't have to recreate the station rotation template or model the plan. You can actually take this and modify it and customize it to work for your classroom and your students. And so let me go ahead and first just show you what's included in here, and I'll drop it in the chat. It should open up in the form of a template so that you can select to, and let me know if there's any trouble there, but it's interactive. So you may be saying, where do I start, right? Like, where do I start? One key piece of optimizing blended learning is thinking about your students, where they are. And so I did include in this choice board here, or we included here, um, all of the blended learning models. However, you may say, okay, well, where do I start with selecting the blended learning model, right? We want to make sure that we're selecting it with purpose. And so there is a model graphic that's included on that first slide there, where you can actually think about what's the goal and the purpose of the learning experience, right? What am I trying to do? And that'll help you get started with the selection of the model. As I said, you know, what considering also what would be the next way or model that you might want to incorporate it, so that they're starting to build on to each other rather than and meeting a need rather than seen in isolation. So each one of these will lead you to more information of like how to dive into the actual planning piece of putting this in action. So you can select where you would start. And at any point, you might say, okay, that's not it. I want to go back and check out another one. So you can do that. You can just go to the home screen, the home tab, and actually be able to dive into it a little more deeply. So with that being said, team, I know that was, we have a fast time and you have a lot of other learnings today. I'll linger back a few if anyone has any other questions, but I would love to just pause. And if you would like to, I did drop in the chat the link to that interactive choice board that really recaps everything, but in a more, you'll see the models as you engage, I hope, with that, with this choice board. To support you in the process. But any comments, questions, or you know, maybe you were inspired, and you know, if you wouldn't mind, I invite you to share a commitment and the steps you might take in order to optimize blended learning or and accelerate the learning experience for your students. So I'll open up the floor here if there are any commitments, comments, or questions.
I would like to share.
Yeah.
We have these new see, I don't even want to, I'm embarrassed to even make my comment a little bit because I don't know what they're called yet, but we're getting these new huge screen TVs in all of our classrooms at my school. And there's these trainings that we're all going to so that we can be able to use these. There's these touch screen, like computer screens. They're not smart boards, but they're actual TVs. And you get to hook your computer up to them and you get to do all these interactive things, but it's like it's sort of like, I guess they're like the smart boards, but they're actual big computer, I guess, or a big TV or something. But and I'm the head of my department, so I'm committed to being able to share these things with the resource for my teachers to be able to try to utilize these computer screens, like their touch screens, and when they're doing their blended learning in their classrooms, and give them these different models and styles of implementing for their lessons. So I wanted to share this with them to be able to facilitate a new way of them teaching in their classrooms with their new technology that they just received. All of that to say that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Is it Bunim? Am I saying your name
Well, my
correctly?
name is Evelyn Boone, but I didn't know how to log in, and I logged in under my Google, and my Google is Boone.
That's okay. That's okay,
So
Evelyn.
my
That's
name is
totally fine.
Evelyn Boone. So
Okay,
logged in
Evelyn.
this morning, but I that's what I wanted to share, is that I plan to use this for a resource for some of my struggling teachers, or some of my teachers are just looking for a great way to connect with their students. And we're a special education. I'm a special education teacher, so I'm the head of my department. So that's what I plan to commit for this, to commit to this for.
Awesome. Awesome. Evelyn, thank you so much for sharing. And I appreciate you just being totally honest and, leaning into the commitment that you're driving the work forward. We're here to support myself, the Link team, your school. I see you're getting a little shout out in the chat. Someone knows you there. So there's a community and we're all in different learning spaces. And so I'm excited that you are thinking about how to even support teachers in this process, because it's a community building, and sounds like you have a really great device that was provided. So that's also exciting. And I'm sure, dive into that choice board. That I believe that will be a really good starting place for some of your teachers that you're supporting. And maybe there's just things you might pull out of there to support them in that process, or even in your learning to get them started with how to even start small and win big in the process of their own learning. So thank you. Thank you. And Sasha, I see you jotted something in. Awesome. Definitely would love to try this next week. Or next year. I attempted this year, but it was very overwhelming. Yeah, at first with a group of students I have this year. Yeah, and Sasha, once again, if you need support, blended learning is an ever changing, or ever learning, I like to think of it, right? Like there's many different avenues you can take of how to support your students and how you might even use this, right? Use these practices with parents, right? There's an onboarding, which didn't go too much in this specific session, but, onboarding into this mindset shift is really important. So taking the time to really foster the culture around blended learning and using these models, we do it with students, right? So onboarding, if I'm using a new tool, onboarding students into what are some things what's the purpose of this tool? How might we consider using this tool? What do I need to know with operating this tool? There's so many different pieces, and that still goes back into that content and skill, right? It's works really in life overall. Starting small, yes, Sasha. Starting small may be the way to go. Absolutely, absolutely, and build from there. You'll notice your skill set. Possibly even take an assessment of where you all are as leaders and educators now. Of what tools do you have in your toolkit? What strategies do you already are familiar with, and build onto those, right? Okay, I'm really good at Padlet. I used it for discussion. How might I use Padlet in a different way, right? And so not necessarily adding a new tool, but rethinking the purpose of how you're using it. Evelyn, I like the idea with starting with a team to share responsibility. Yes. And that's going to go a long way when thinking about transformation. That forms professional learning communities. It's collaborative, it breaks out of comfort zones. So all of that ties into this work of blended learning, which I get really excited about in the process. But I know you all have I think it's lunchtime coming up, but I know you have many other things. So Amanda, I'm going to toss it over to you. And thank you all. Thank you. I know this was fast, but I'm around. Let's connect. Let's connect further. So thank you from the entire Link team and also from myself. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Shin. That was awesome. Thank you for sharing that and presenting that for us. Just for everybody, I'll be putting this in the chat. Please take this survey. It's just a survey about this session in particular, just so we can have your comments and things you liked about this session. And like Jen said, we are now having a lunch session. There'll be a 10-minute break. And then we'll have a specific speaker during the lunch hour till about 12:40. And then session 4 will start after that. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much, Amanda.